Okay, good afternoon here at Sky News show at 2:45. We have a very special guest with us here today, Mr. George W. Bush, the current President of the United States. Hello, Mr. Bush.
Hello.
Okay. What we're going to be talking about today is affirmative action. And so recently, George W. Bush gave out a survey in this country called "How do you feel about affirmative action? Do you think it's necessary? Is it required? Is it still required? And was it required in the first place?" But what's most interesting about the survey is that George W. Bush gave out a loaded question, which in the world of statistics we all know is taboo. So let's talk to George Bush here, so he can have some interesting things to say.
Yeah, I'd like to thank you for having me on your show, Mr. McDougall. Yes, in America, we really don't like the system that discriminates against whites, called affirmative action. So my very smart statistician friend Dan Quayle gave out a survey recently to a large group of white Americans. The survey question was very fair and impartial and did not introduce sampling bias. And the sampling question was, do you think that the extremely bad system that discriminates against whites for the benefit of blacks, Mexicans, etc., that might have been a bit offensive, I'm sorry, is bad? And I said, and I think affirmative action is bad. But this survey was going to prove to the world that the American populace disapproved of affirmative action also. So my very brilliant statistician friend named Dan Quayle gave this survey out. Now, his most common response was a no. To be extremely accurate, because I'm a very smart president, is that the people who said no, which we defined as a success, was 0.6875% of the people. Now, that's very, very against it. Now, as you can tell by that survey result, the people estimated that the actual proportion of people that disapproved of affirmative action was 50%. But this proves that the majority of the American population disapproves of affirmative action. And being a very fair survey question, this should definitely be used to strike down affirmative action and restore the American dream.
I'm going to have to stop you right there, Mr. Bush. Clearly that's a loaded question and that's not valid. So I decided to conduct an experiment that would test, is having a loaded question going to have a significant impact on sampling results? Okay, so the main purpose of this experiment is not to determine if affirmative action is whether people think it's good or bad, because quite frankly I don't care. The main purpose of this was to take a political question which, according to existing research, is split in America 50-50 normally amongst Democrats and Republicans, and third-party members tend to sway towards the liberal side. But the main purpose of that experiment is that. So that's the main purpose of the experiment, not to determine whether people are opposed or unopposed to affirmative action. It's really just to determine the effects of a loaded question on a non-loaded question. Okay, so we went to the streets and we took a survey of white Americans, as Mr. Bush said, to determine how they felt about affirmative action.
I think it's necessary because it protects minorities.
How do you feel about the incredibly unjust system that discriminates against whites called affirmative action?
I feel like affirmative action is an unfair system that can take away opportunity from people who otherwise
Incredibly
might
unjust system that discriminates against whites.
Well, I understand the concept of it, but I think it's unfair to whites, as you said.
So I went out and I calculated randint, and randint 121, which will generate one value of either 1 or 2. Now, I assigned all white Americans in the room a number, 1 through the amount of people there were, and I assigned those numbers randomly, and I randint generated 10 numbers. I randint generated 8 numbers in each class to have a sampling size of 32, and I did that. I did 8 in each class, and then when I got to the first person, I did it in terms of the smallest number to the least number, and then I did randint 121 to get either 1 or 2. And then from there on out, I went 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2 in numerical order of the person being called. So that's how the survey was random and taken in a very impartial way.
So as you can see, when I collected the data, I actually had a 0.5-0.5 split. I had 8 people say no, it's not necessary, and 8 people say yes, it's necessary, which is, very interesting because that's exactly what the research predicted. But if you look at this graph, when the second we ask the same, general demographic of people the same question, the white Americans, you see a significantly different response with a difference between the proportions of 0.1875.
So my null hypothesis was that there was no difference between the proportions of people being given a loaded and a non-loaded question. And my alternate hypothesis was that there was a difference, and that it's the proportion of people being given a loaded question saying no to it because they're being pressured into it, obviously, is higher than being given a fair and non-loaded question. And I used an alpha level of 0.025 and I found a p-value of 0.1444, which obviously I failed to reject the null, that there is no difference between the proportions, and the data is inconclusive, and in the future I will conduct more tests. Okay, so that's just codswallop up to you if you are a statistician, so I'll translate into normal person terms. Basically, I found that we cannot disprove that there is no difference, but eventually, as more tests are conducted, there is a chance that it could be disproven. This experiment, I feel, was very flawed and had some errors. For one, I think when I sampled certain people, maybe they talked to their friends about what the question was in between, which could have influenced their responses, kind of a respondent-to-respondent survey mixed-up bias. And also, I think we would have rejected the null with a very low p-value. The problem was we just had a very low sampling size of only 32, 16 in each sample group, being a 2 proportion z-test. So that was the main source of error, because clearly a 0.1875 is a huge difference. So I think the main factor that made us generate a high p-value was that we had a very low sampling size. Due to time constraints, I was only able to have a small sampling size. I only had 5 failures for the 5 yeses, which I counted as a failure for the loaded question, which barely meets the assumption and condition for that. So it's extremely necessary that future studies be conducted, because something like this is very important to the statistical community, and especially because the implications of this are huge. It deals with the very foundation and core of surveying and statistics, so future studies definitely... My conclusion was I failed to reject the null, that there was no difference between 2 proportions of asking a loaded and a non-loaded question, whether they were pressured into responding the way I pressured them. And the data is inconclusive, mostly because the sampling size was not large enough, and future studies definitely need to be conducted. So the implications of this are kind of confounded though, because the sampling size is only 16, and with such a small sampling size, it definitely needs to be a bigger sampling size. So future studies definitely need to have a sampling size, I would say, of at least 100 people in each group to get a low p-value, if you were in fact to continue to get looks. But obviously with such 0.6875 might just be, it's likely that having a loaded question is influencing people in that direction, but it could just be an extreme sample, which is what the p-value itself allows for.
You're a single mother with 2 children, which is the toughest job in America as far as I'm concerned. You're working hard to put food on your family.